6:34 a.m., January 28, 1547. After a brief but troubled reign, King Edward VI of England died. He was only 15 years old. But who will replace him on the throne? Will it be Lady Jane Grey, the Protestant princess? Or perhaps the young Catholic Mary Tudor? Well, we already know the answer to that one. In this video, we're going to look at how Henry VIII died, why he chose Mary over Jane, and finally, what happened to his remains after all these centuries. Let's get into it. Henry VIII had been planning for this moment for some time. In fact, in October 1546, he even wrote a letter to the council outlining what he wanted done when he died. The first thing was for them to pick someone he described as most fit to be our successor. He knew his time was coming to an end. He was overweight, around 4 feet 11 inches tall, and suffered from terrible health problems, including severe leg ulcers. It's also likely that he had diabetes and high blood pressure, neither of which are good things when you're in the 16th century. But who was next in line after Henry? This is where it gets a bit complicated. He had 3 legitimate children: Mary, Queen of France, then Elizabeth, and then the sickly Edward. So it should be pretty straightforward, right? Wrong. In 1533, Henry had married Anne Boleyn and had broken with the Roman Catholic Church. He set up the Church of England with himself as its head. He did this without the Pope's permission, and it caused something of a problem. You see, the Catholic Church says that any marriage between a man and a woman who are both still alive can only be annulled by the Pope. And Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, was still alive. So the only way Henry could marry Anne was to first have his marriage to Catherine annulled. But she refused to accept the annulment unless the Pope said it was okay. And the Pope wasn't budging either because Catherine was the aunt of Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, and the Pope didn't want to start a war with Spain. So Henry decided to go ahead and break away anyway. But now there was another problem. What about Mary, his daughter with Catherine? She would be next in line to the throne if Henry simply went ahead and ignored the Pope. But Henry had declared that Mary was illegitimate, so he couldn't risk her taking the throne. And that's why in 1543, he passed a law stating that if he died without a male heir, the throne would pass to the children of his second son, Henry Fitz, who died in infancy, and then to the children of any other sons that he might have. That meant that if he had another son, they would take priority over Mary. This is where things get really complicated, because while Henry had 2 daughters with Anne, they were both girls, and he had no more sons. In 1546, he had a 3rd marriage to Catherine Howard, but that produced no children. Then he married Catherine Parr, but she also didn't have any kids. But just before he died, Henry realized that he needed a male heir to continue the Tudor dynasty. So in October, he finally recognized Mary as his rightful heir, making her the first female monarch of England in almost 100 years. So let's just recap. First, Henry broke with Rome. Then he declared Mary illegitimate. Then he made a law saying Mary wouldn't be queen. And then he died thinking he needed a male heir. Now Mary was queen. When Henry died on January 28, 1547, he was at his beloved hunting lodge in Norfolk. He was only 55 years old and had reigned for 37 years, longer than any king since William the Conqueror. His last words were supposedly, "I am the king's most loyal subject, and I can hear him no more." Then he died. His funeral was held in January 1548. His coffin was carried in a chariot from Windsor Castle to London, and it took 5 days to arrive. Can you imagine the smell? It was covered with black cloth and surmounted by a canopy of state, a waxwork effigy of the dead king, surrounded by 4 mourning women representing England, Ireland, Scotland, and France. A huge crowd gathered to watch the funeral procession, which included 2,000 gentlemen and yeomen of the guard, 1,000 soldiers, and 5,000 other attendants. It was a somber occasion, and the bells of every church along the route were muffled to avoid disturbing the dead king. He was buried alongside his second wife, Anne, in St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, next to their daughter, the stillborn Elizabeth. At the time, it was thought that only one person could occupy a royal tomb, so the remains of Henry's other wives were left in their original places of burial. However, in 1813, when the tomb was opened, it turned out that both Henry and Anne's remains had been placed in the same coffin. This was probably done to prevent grave robbers from stealing their bodies, since Henry's was exhumed twice during the 18th century. However, after the discovery, it was decided to move them to separate coffins. This was done on July 24, 1813, in a ceremony attended by King George, Prince Regent, and a large number of nobles and commoners. The king's remains were transferred to a new mahogany coffin lined with lead and velvet and covered with black cloth. The coffin was placed in the vault below the choir at St. George's Chapel, where it remains today. However, one small part of his remains ended up not in a tomb, but in a jar on a shelf in the Tower of London. You see, when the coffin was being moved, one of the leaden coffin nails was removed and placed in a small box by an official known as the yeoman warder. It's believed that this was done so that each of the yeoman wards could have a piece of the royal coffin as a souvenir. However, this is disputed by others who claim that it was actually a relic of the martyrdom of Sir Thomas More, who was executed by Henry in 1535 and whose head was cut off and hung in the same tower. Whatever the truth, the nail was put into a jar and placed on display in the White Tower until 1969. It was then transferred to the modern Tower of London Exhibition Space at London Bridge, where it remains today. It's hard to believe that this tiny relic is all that remains of such a powerful and influential monarch. But what do you think? Is it disrespectful for souvenirs to be made of human remains? Do you think Henry was a good or bad king? And should Mary or Elizabeth have taken the throne instead? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're down there, please subscribe if you haven't already. We'd love to have you join the community. And don't forget to check out our other videos, which come out every Wednesday and Saturday. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.